Hmm. Uh, huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Ruben Olson.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're going to be talking about the Thunderbird. But before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca. You can also find us on our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And we're also on Patreon. We can get ad-free, exclusive early episodes and some other cool little tier rewards that are available there as well. If you want to send us an email, you can send us one at cryptidclues@gmail.com if you want to say hi or see what's going on. But without further ado, let's get into this. Now, strangely enough, Ruben and I haven't dived into this cryptid yet, and it's most certainly on the itinerary to take a deep dive into it. But that doesn't dismiss us from exploring the surface of it with some encounters in today's episode. So, what is a Thunderbird? Chances are, if you've traveled throughout North America, you've seen representation of it without realizing it. It's a creature closely associated with North American indigenous culture and history, particularly in the Pacific Northwest and the Great Lakes areas, and often considered as being a supernatural form of power and strength. Now, some stories told of these birds claim that when they would flap their wings, it was powerful enough to create thunder, with lightning flashing out of their eyes and water draining off their backs, thus creating rain and kind of formulating that name. And it's interesting how they've been used as legends and stories, but also as a reference for describing certain things too in their culture. So when we jump ahead by a few generations, we see that large bird sightings become surprisingly common. And when settlers started branching further west in North America, Thunderbirds, as well as Bigfoot and many other cryptid sightings, started to become more frequent. But of all the cryptids that fly, and believe me, there are others, you got your Mothman, Jersey Devil, and there's a few others down the list as well, the Thunderbird is truly a fascinating one based on the encounters alone. So let's get into our first account. This encounter comes from the Arizona Territory Desert. This is a very more famous one. If you go on the Googles, you'll notice this one is a more prominent one. And it's about two cowboys stumbling upon a giant flying creature back in 1890. As the cowboys approached it, they brought their rifles up and took aim at it, and they immediately started opening fire. Now, as per an article dated April 26, 1980 of the Tombstone Epigraph, both cowboys and their horses dragged the deceased creature back into town, where they managed to measure its wingspan, clocking in at around 190 feet with a body at 92 feet long. Its description was this, and I quote, "No feathers, but a smooth skin and wings composed of a thick and nearly transparent membrane." End quote. Now, this is where you could say it's a pterosaur or a pteranodon perhaps, but let's not rule out the feathered attributes just yet, nor let us rule out this pterosaur concept either as we progress into some more encounters. Now, a lot of paranormal researchers consider this story to be a good example of Old West fantasy writing that was specifically written as a headline for this local newspaper just to kind of get people on edge and to spend a few cents on the paper that day. So it's worth noting, however, that not all of it may actually be false. And in 1970, there was a man named Harry MacLeod. He actually claimed that he knew one of the cowboys when he was a small boy. The real story, as the cowboy told Harry MacLeod, was that the creature they shot at had a wingspan of 20 to 30 feet, and they did not kill it. However, they did return to the town only with their legendary story, but they did not have a body, only this experience that they reported on. So I think that's very fascinating to have another perspective there to kind of add a little bit, I can't say credibility, but highlight an alternative aspect of the story. Now, We can jive towards a more recent one here in 2018. This is way out in Alaska. A woman driving caught a brief glimpse at a gigantic bird, and as she puts it, with a wingspan nearly as wide as the road. Now, it's possible that Thunderbirds are a modern-day Teratorn. And Teratorns, however, did go extinct roughly 10,000 years ago, but they were a huge North American bird of prey. I highly suggest looking at photos of these things, as they are indeed massive. They're bigger than the present-day Andean condor, which, again, the condor can have a wingspan of over 3 meters itself, which is it's huge. Now, I realize where I'm taking us next with this upcoming encounter, and I swear, Pennsylvania is just a dang hotspot for all things cryptid. I know, I just did an episode earlier this week about the Albatwitch of Pennsylvania, and that shed some light more onto the state and all these different occurrences. But Pennsylvania, you guys, like, just be careful out there, because it seems like you have a hot spot for things. Now, in the evening of Tuesday, specifically September 25th, 2001, an individual claimed to have spotted a giant flying creature with a massive wingspan going over Route 119 in South Greensburg, Pennsylvania. Now, the individual's attention was pulled to the sky initially by a sound that resembled flags flapping in a storm. You can imagine in severe winds that sound a flag will make as it kind of whips itself back and forth. That's kind of what they were describing here. The individual claimed that this creature had a wingspan of 10 to 15 feet and had a head that reached around 3 feet in length. They also reported that this grayish-brown bird was flying at around 50 to 60 feet above them, and they noted that when it flapped its wings, it did so not gracefully, but rather they actually used the term horrifically and said that it was kind of slowly, so not very fast, but just kind of like slow, and it had these periodical glides in between its flappings as it kind of moved over the traffic flow. And this whole encounter lasted for about 90 seconds and concluded when the giant creature landed on a dead tree branch. The individual noted that the branch nearly broke off due to the creature's weight, but there was no other supporting evidence to back this claim, unfortunately, and after even a site search, nothing additionally was found to support the encounter. But, again, that's not the only sighting to come out of Pennsylvania, and to add merit to the previous encounter, it's that these other sightings all seem to have similar descriptions. We have two specifically in both June and July of Pennsylvania. So let's explore the June sighting first. On the 13th, a resident of Greenville, Pennsylvania, was caught off guard when a massive-sized, grayish-black creature flew above them. Thinking first that it was a plane or maybe even like a light aircraft, the resident finally caught a glimpse at it, and they actually had well over 20 minutes of observation of this creature. They could see that it had a fully feathered body, and they were able to make a confident claim that it had a wingspan of at least, you guessed it, 15 feet, with a body of 5 feet in length, roughly. For, again, about 15 minutes of this observation so far, the giant bird was again sitting on a branch. And then, all of a sudden, it flew off and started heading south. Now, there was a neighbor who was able to enforce this initial claim, also stating it was, and I quote, "the biggest bird I ever saw." Again, Thunderbird sightings go back hundreds of years, like most cryptid claims do. They have been even blamed for abductions, both some successful attempts and unsuccessful of trying to get kids or small children. Now, I can't speak to the nature of that, whether it's an equivalent to an eagle seeing a small critter on the ground and is hunting. You know, whenever you see a hawk or an eagle, you bring in like your little puppy or your cats. You gotta be aware of that kind of thing. Or does it share a mindset that's similar to that of a Bigfoot, where we hear so many accounts of Bigfoot often trying to lure a young kid or a child away from their parents into wooded areas and such. Again, it's all hypothetical, of course, and I can't speak to these Thunderbirds necessarily having a advanced, what would be the word for that? The concept of self-awareness. You know, are they abducting this child just because? And maybe, I'm not saying Bigfoot have that sense of self-awareness to abduct a child for whatever reasons they want. I'm saying the Thunderbird is probably looking at it more or less as food. than it is to look at it as abduct to adopt, in a sense, like a Bigfoot would. Again, when I'm looking at these cryptids and making comparisons, I like to make the comparisons between cryptids and just see the similarities, whether it's mindsets or movements, mannerisms, because you might be surprised what you can kind of find there. But before moving on, I'm going to jump to a quick ad break and we'll be right back. And we're back. So, again, like I said, we have one in July, and moving on, being less than a month later, this is on the 6th of July, a resident of Erie County, Pennsylvania, reported something eerily similar, pun intended. According to their report, the creature had once again a consistent wingspan estimated to be about 15 to 17 feet. It was a dark gray color with little to no neck, but it had a circle of black under its head, and it had a very thin and long beak. It was roughly about 1 foot in length, as it was reported. And if these reports are to be true, then we're dealing with the largest flying bird in our present day and time. And fun fact, currently the largest known bird is the wandering albatross, which has a wingspan of almost 12 feet. So that's getting pretty close with these reports coming in about 15, 17 feet. And who's to say one lone albatross couldn't reach that point? But an albatross kind of going out to Pennsylvania seems a little odd. I've never been to Pennsylvania myself, but if you're from Pennsylvania, I'd love it if you could confirm if you have an albatross population out there, specifically wandering albatross. So touching back on the topic of abductions, though, I do have some reports of children being abducted as well. And I quote here, a 10-year-old Marlon Lowe and his mother, Mrs. Ruth Lowe, claim that one of 2 large blackbirds with 8-foot wingspans tried to carry Marlin off in its claws on Monday evening in Lawndale, Illinois. Although several bird experts say that no bird native to Illinois could lift 70-pound Marlin, Mrs. Lowe says that Marlin was carried 20 feet before the bird dropped him when he struck the bird with his hand. And that's the end of that encounter there. I just think that's truly wild. Again, this could be similar to that dynamic where the bird sees a small pet cat, dog, and tries to go in for it. And the bird's not necessarily going to be able to differentiate a small child from that too. It's going to see it as prey and it's going to make a move on it. Now, this child being 70 pounds, it would have to be a very powerful bird to do such a thing. Having an 8-foot wingspan, I imagine that it would definitely be able to garner up the strength to kind of glide off, but carry 20 feet. I've seen some videos of hawks coming in and like grabbing like a kid, and they're definitely outsized. They're not strong enough to lift the child up, but they got momentum and they can grab that kid and literally lift him off the ground and kind of coast along the ground about 5-10 feet. But 20 feet, that's a lot of power backing that. Now, other abduction stories include that of a 42-pound 5-year-old girl named Svanhild Hansen, and in June 1932 was carried away by what was reported a huge eagle by her parents. And this was their farm in Lika, Norway. So this giant bird carried her for more than a mile. This is what the report claimed, after which it dropped her. She was unharmed on basically a mountain ledge, and their family was able to get to her there, thank goodness. Again, she's not 70 pounds like Marlin was, but 42 pounds, that's still a lot of weight for a bird. If we jump back a little bit further, in 1838, we have another 5-year-old girl who was grabbed from the slope of a Swiss Alp, where she was playing, and this eagle that carried the child off basically brought the child to its nest. And unfortunately, the girl did not survive this ordeal. They had found her body, and it was discovered about 2 months later by a shepherd. The eagle's nest that they had found was said to contain several smaller eagles and heaps of goat and sheep bones. So kind of steering us back to Pennsylvania again. I don't mean to, it's the hot spot. On May 26 in 2013, there were 2 friends walking through the woods near Brynathan Castle, and that's when something really strange startled them. It was extremely loud, and one of the witnesses had glanced up and saw a huge black bird. And in the report, they claimed that it was sitting above them, and they had seemed to startle it, which it flew about 100 feet over to a nearby branch. They claimed its wingspan was at least 10 feet. And judging how far it was, it looked to be around 4 feet tall. So again, not around the 15, 17 feet, but 10 feet is still very significantly large. Especially it would startle you if you happen to look up and see the massive bird above you. But to kind of bring this episode to a close here, these flying cryptids, they've been seen many a time. But we still are just lacking on credible photo or video of these things, nor has a body ever been found or captured. And I'm sure not for their lack of trying. It's definitely one thing to go out into the woods in the wilderness to try and see a Bigfoot or a dogman, but I imagine it's a whole other thing trying to find something that's flying in the skies. Again, we have drones now, we have a lot of technology, and as far as humanity goes, I don't want to say we own the skies, but we're definitely everywhere. Chances are you look up, you'll see planes or helicopters or something flying around out there. So we have a pretty good coverage in the sky. But it can't dismiss the possibility of these things flying. You know, when you're in a plane, you don't always have the greatest field of view. And I want you to think about that for a second, because yes, you're in a plane, you can see for miles and you have a great, line of sight and panoramic view for sure. But if you are a giant bird and you know how things work, and when I say you know how things work, you know how hunting works, and you know if you are a target for something, you know how to avoid being in that line of sight. So perhaps these things, when they see some planes flying lower to the ground, they tend to fly in blind spots because they might think, okay, this is a much bigger thing that is bigger than me, and maybe this thing's looking at me as being prey, so we're going to steer clear. Planes are also very loud. It's kind of like if you drive a car out into the woods, sure, you do have a chance of seeing a Bigfoot, extremely rare at the right time, but a lot of times Bigfoot will hear, and I firmly believe that when you're driving out the woods, you're probably passing Bigfoot left, right, and center, and they're just choosing not to be seen by you because they can hear you coming miles away. Granted, there are instances where you're going for miles down a dark road and you see it. And I think that can be applied again to the Thunderbird here, where these things, they must know you're coming, like these two individuals walking through the woods, and then all of a sudden this extremely loud flapping bird is just kind of like peering at them and is kind of startled and kind of like saunters off. So it's a connected kind of equivalency that I'm kind of comparing at here. But I'm sure if these things are out there, they're probably, at the end of the day, not really flying super, super high up where WestJet or a Boeing 747 is going to see them or anything like that. But they're probably going to be lower, flying in the tree line. I think the description again of these two individuals walking through the woods, that was definitely fantastic to have that, because we can now analyze the fact that, okay, this thing is in the woods. Other people's accounts of driving on the highways say, okay, it likes to sit on the branch of a tree. And I imagine being of such a large mass, this thing probably does tire out. I mean, it has the wingspan, it can support itself, probably can fly for a very long period of time, but you're going to exert a lot of energy. And these things, if there's not a lot of them, are probably going to be prone to resting for long periods of time. Again, that is my own interpretation of that. But to kind of, again, like I said, bring this episode to a close for the heck of it, let's just dish out two more encounters here. So, both from the state of Pennsylvania. In the early 1940s, writer Robert R. Lehman spotted a Thunderbird sitting on a road near Coudersport, Pennsylvania. It soon took to the sky, spreading what he claimed was a 20-foot wingspan. And in 1969, wife of Clinton County, Pennsylvania sheriff happened to have seen an enormous bird over at Little Pine Creek. She said its wingspan appeared to be about as long as the creek was wide, with about 75 feet. That is insane. Again, that's getting up to the original initial cowboy claim that we had, where it was like over 100 feet of a wingspan. So it's interesting. But at the end of the day, it seems like the consistency here is 15 to 20 feet with about a 4-foot body, about a 1-foot long beak. And a majority of these claims seem to be feathered. grayish, brown, black. Well, there are some that do report that kind of pteranodon, pterodactyl kind of wingspan, kind of like consistency, like smooth skin, featherless. So that's something that I'm going to be exploring a lot more with Ruben, however. Again, I wanted to just dive into some encounters for the Thunderbird in today's episode, but to really dive into the history, the culture, and the lore, you can expect an episode of me and Ruben exploring all of that in the future, because it's such a rich part of history that we can talk about. So with, of course, a few more encounters thrown in. But that's all I got for today's episode, so I hope you enjoyed it. You can find us again on our website, CryptidClues.ca, on our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, and our Patreon. We get ad-free, exclusive early episodes. And if you want to send us an email, say hi, CryptidClues@gmail.com. But until next time, everyone, especially if you're out in Pennsylvania, stay safe and take care. Thank you.